are the preparations being made in the event of where we may see this again, or what we have done, such as meetings you've had with your cabinet or people or lobbyists, our lobbyists in Washington, any of that you can share with us about the shutdown?
Well, first, let me go back to May, because that's when hearings were held on the 2018 budget. And so I testified in front of the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, and there's several things I asked at that time. One was that they follow regular order, which means they have hearings both in the House and the Senate side, and that we have a budget, because for the past 3 years we've operated on continuing resolutions. And so I explained to them some of the problems with operating on continuing resolutions. And so it's strange that we find ourselves now in January, and 4 months into the fiscal year, still operating on continuing resolutions. And this one today, if it's signed by the President, will be through February the 8th. And we'll be going through the motions of restarting on the federal side the processes they interrupted on Friday night at midnight, to be able to work with the nation. Now, as the nation, we are in pretty good shape, because we've fortunate that health and safety programs remain funded. So through the Indian Health Service, we were contacted and said that we have the authority to continue to operate, and as self-governance tribes, any revenues or any appropriations that we have, we can continue to spend. And so, it takes us a certain time into the future, should this have been prolonged. We receive the same from the Department of Justice, so our Light Horse could continue to operate. And I think the Department of Indian Education, that they would continue to fund their educational requirements. So there are provisions for the essential services to continue. Fortunately, we provide a lot of essential services. And so for instance, the military, they will receive their pay through the end of January. Now, by going to 30 days, it'll be through the end of February. And that's important because we have citizens who are service members, and they rely upon both active duty pay and then benefits for service-connected disabilities. So it's good that we revisit the issue and can assure our citizens that with these interruptions, that we can continue to deliver those services that people need.
Now, when you say we can keep delivering those services, when there might be an instance where we do need to fill a gap where government is shut down, do you know where that funding source is from us? Is it gaming revenue? Is it permanent fund? Anything like that you could share? Do you know?
As a self-governance tribe, both with the Department of the Interior and HHS, we get kind of front-end funding under our self-governance compact agreements, and as much as the federal government can provide us under their authority, but we get to put that money in the bank and draw interest upon it until we use it. So, this being January, we haven't used all the money that they've given us so far, and so, it's times like we're in right now that's very important, because we need to utilize those funds. Now, there would come, should this be prolonged for some, extended length of time, then yes, we would have some problems. But, I would say with a surety that 30 days or so, we're fine. And in this case, they were just 3 days out and came to an agreement. We'll see where this one goes. But I still go back to the fact that we really need appropriation bills, individual appropriation bills, because the risk of having the continuing resolutions are that, in this case, the federal government can only provide commitments to February 8th. And it's really hard, having worked for the federal government, to put short-term contracts in place. You spend more money than the value you get when you spread your commitment over a 12-month period of time. And so, I'm sure that this is messaged many ways by many people and the different parties, but the net result to the operation of the government is that it gets interrupted or it gets shortened in some way that you can't take full use of the efficiency that you can get with a 12-month appropriation.
What potential do you see that could result in a possible shutdown? Let's just say it goes to 30 days, or where it would be an issue for us in MCN employees not being able to come to work.
We'll stay in communication with them should we see something that would even appear to have any indication that would extend over even a week or two, and prepare them. We would be just like the federal government. We do know that after the federal government reopens, then they generally repay the expense that you would have for the services that you provided during the shutdown, and we would expect the same. And so we would instruct our people who provide the essential services that those will continue, and then should it go for an extended period of time, which is very unlikely, but still is a possibility in the environment that we're in, then we have to pick and choose who can come to work and who couldn't. But fortunately, we didn't this time, and hopefully we won't in the future.
Chief, as you said, that you've worked on both sides now, federal government, tribal government. What is something like this, a government shutdown, no matter how long it is, but what effect does it have on general operations between tribal and federal entities? A couple of examples I would say would be HUD with housing, IHS with health, transportation with the Department of Transportation, things like that. What kind of effect does it have on the general operations there?
Well, I think in general, you can't help but have some type of a slowdown, because whatever works in progress most likely halts during the shutdown of the government. And regardless if it's a day or 3 days like we've had here, then they have to go back in and restart. And so you lose the momentum that you've had. And so it may not have a profound effect upon us, but it prolongs some of the issues that we deal with. And this week, there's some issues that I had hoped to deal with the Bureau of Indian Affairs on. Got a call late Friday evening that told me that they most likely won't be able to meet with me this week, so that pushes things back at least a week. And so it's things like that policy decisions get pushed back. And so you can't help but have some negative effect regardless of the length of time that the government shut down.
Would you see some similarities, the effect that you talked about there with policy and communication, really, being able to get in the same room, as you said, affecting things like pending legislation, 47 Act, Murphy case, things like that? Do you see a trickle effect there as well? Well,
the Murphy Act that you mentioned is a good example, and it's one I was on the phone Friday trying to make sure with our lobbyists and with the Department of Interior, the acting assistant deputy secretary, on the phone with him to make sure that these things get prepared, as well as with the House staff on the 47 Act, so that it continues to move and gets scheduled for markup in February. That's our goal. And here it is, at the end of January, and we get an interruption. The staff gets exhausted because they're working till wee hours of the morning without pay themselves, and so it wears on them. And I just hope in all of this, interruption between the federal government and legislative branches, that things like the 47 Act markup don't get lost. So we hope that it doesn't. I was assured Friday evening that things are still on track, and we'll follow up tomorrow on that.
We had talked with you just recently here about your excitement for the new year, specifically for things like the master plan, really focusing in on a master plan for the nation. You mentioned that a large part of that is us being aggressive in getting grants. Any effect you see with sort of the uncertainty in federal government with being able to get those grants that we need to do master planning?
I think what we will see in terms of grants that we would go apply for, that's in conjunction with the master plan is that it would be later in the year when they award those, because their money's being parceled out to them in short increments. And so to be able to offer a grant program nationally that we'd be able to apply for, they have to have enough money and the authority to support the grants. So what we may expect in, let's say, March may come as late as August. And so it does have an effect. And that goes back to why when I spoke before the subcommittee, that we've got to have an appropriation bill. We need to follow the normal process and have hearings and hearing reports that we can use so that even administrative language surrounding the grant can be inserted and applied so that we don't have these delays in any operation, because there's significant items that we need to deal with.
From a tribal administration stance, is there any feeling one way or another on how this is being handled federally between congressional, even executive ends? What's going on? Because we can't get away from having an eye and really caring about how the federal government is operating with a lot of our programs. Any official administrative stance or one that you would like to provide with how you see this is played out? I mean, I know that government will be government, there will be disagreements, but how are you and other tribal leaders seeing how this is really played out?
Well, on Friday I spoke to two of the other leaders of the 5 tribes, and we had conversations based on legislation, essentially. But I was like probably any other citizen of the nation Friday night, at 11 o'clock at night, watching TV to see what they're going to do. And the dynamics are, very diverse. As you noticed, on the floor of the Senate, there was 2 camps, essentially, trying to come to some type of negotiation at the final minutes of the evening, and they didn't. The vote wasn't the way they wanted it, so they left, and there was no talk on Saturday. There's a lot of dynamics at play, and I think, especially at this time, it's really difficult to understand who's really in the leadership position, whether it be in the House or Senate or the White House. That confusion ends up affecting the legislative processes to some degree. And fortunately, we have people who work with the staff members to make sure that regardless of what goes on that's visible to the public, behind the scenes, that hard work that needs to take place continues. And as we talked about earlier in this conversation, the markup scheduling, make sure that that's done so that when they come back tomorrow, as they had planned to look at the schedule of markups in the month of February, it proceeds the way that it should. And so we had everything lined up. We just hope that tomorrow it follows through the way that it should.
But before we get to February 8th, Chief, is there any plans that have been made or any instructions from you to get some people together in a room about this, whether it be a cabinet meeting to look at it again or an executive level meeting, anything like that, as far as planning and just getting it on the radar of some of the department heads?
Well, we did speak briefly about this today in the cabinet meeting. We want to make sure that they all were aware of the status. I'll be speaking with the Speaker of the National Council here this afternoon, and he and I will also be discussing some of the things that could be potential impacts should another continuing resolution fail to pass. And we'll work to be prepared along those lines. And I'm thankful that cabinet members have the awareness that they have already kind of preemptively taken the actions they need to assure that things continue and we serve our citizens. So it was that's why we had a brief conversation. They had already planned and made provisions for continuing services. We just want to assure the citizens that today, as we are going through this experience of the continuing resolutions and the interruption of the government, that our citizens feel that we're looking out for them and we're preparing so that there's no break in service to them. And fortunately, hopefully they didn't see any of that over the weekend or today, and we hope that they don't experience anything like that in the future.